If you could just say to the camera, say your name and a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Yeah, listening to David, I'm Seymour Carter, one of David's colleagues at Esalen Institute, where we were part of the team of revolutionary psychotherapists, people influenced by the social scientists, who revolutionized, with Fritz Perls as our chieftain, psychotherapy in the 1960s. And David and I have now been practicing psychotherapy or process psychology for over 40 years. And at Esalen, we more or less developed, I think, out of the civil rights era of people developing their rights to have a deeper subjectivity. Esalen formed like a flagship for these kinds of explorations that now, looking back 40 years later, we can say, yes, Esalen was some form, some branch of the civil rights movement of the 60s, and we, in our own special way, developed the civil right, or the rights to have a deeper and more complicated and more nuanced subjectivity, an inner life. Some people call this spiritual life. I'm not a transcendentalist, but it's in this realm that Esalen made its mark, of people starting to find that the realms of the nonverbal, the body, if you will, the spirit, can be manifest. And our explorations in the 60s began with mysticism and LSD and schizophrenia. What were the commonalities here? And I feel that we've continued this. I don't use LSD anymore, but I feel it forms a solid basis of my current researches.
Excellent.
And he's about the most realized schizophrenic I've ever met.
Can I come in here?
Please.
You're painting the picture a little too pastel for me, because I feel that part of the enjoyments of my later life have not been about peace and kindness and consideration, but have been about battle and about facing off with oppositional powers. And in looking back on my life, I feel like, my God, if I hadn't had oppositional strengths, I would have gotten nowhere. And to capitulate to the surroundings, atmospherics, especially in this capitalistic culture that we live in, I feel like when I hear words of peace and kindness, I feel like that's a kind of a capitulation to a surroundings that is actually oppositional to the peace party aims, I think. The kinds of laboratory that California permitted to European ideas has been immense. In our lifetime, we're really riding, I think, in many ways, on the European exiles of all kinds of very important thinkers, like Erik Erikson, Erich Fromm, all these philosophical psychologists, the philosophers, all who were driven out of Europe by the Nazis, came here and provided us with a basis of European knowledge and canons of knowledge in science, in art, and created, I think, an incredibly colorful creative flowering from the 50s, 60s, 70s in the United States. And when you look at the leading voices speaking about these things, the precursors to Esalen, these were many times European ideas, European personalities like Fritz Perls or Charlotte Selver. They're European personalities, and allowed to flower in the sun of the California freedoms that they met here, then a youth culture that you and I are part of, who were completely prepared. And in fact, we blew away our European teachers because we were so prepared to carry forward the ideas of freedom and freedom of expression that they were blown away, that they only had the inklings of in Europe.
Well, I think, too, if you think back on Fritz's departure to Canada, when American politics had heated up over the war, and he was fearful, as he had been when he was in Europe and went to South Africa, that the climate of repression grows out of the fear people
Yeah,
have.
that was the Nixon years.
And he was in agony over the thought he might be one more time in the midst of matters persecutional. And he picked himself up and fled.
That was 71 or so.
So, you know, I mean,
like
yeah, so there was an interesting thing about...
It's funny that that's gone on all these years, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse.
Well, the ironies, they pile themselves one on top of another, but we still, in our own odd ways, have remained abiding in matters of necessary appreciation for liberty, for this inner realm that is our right to know well. You know, psychedelic drugs, which have fallen into a variety of categories over the years, represent a right to inhabit inner freedom of the kind that is very, very intensely felt.
The mystical states.
You know, and you're being, you know, in a state of criminality, because I think part of what we've learned is how to abide with our criminal interests, whether they're drug-related or politically potentially related, and maintain nonetheless an appreciation for the risks taken and the willingness to go forward anyway.
Well, I'd like to make a comment here for the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan and all the outlaw musicians that really did, the rock musicians who carried forward this, let's say, the edge, the criminal edge, in terms of the proprieties of bourgeois cultures, notions of what is criminal, that my generation and the musicians of my generation, the heroes of my generation, all carried forward the outlaw edge, which is necessary for some kind of creativity. This culture was a fucking a sponge cake of nothingness, of just repression and categories that no one could escape. And along come rock and roll and knocked everything apart because it came together and gave a kind of a rhythm to something that the intellectual culture could not deal with. The culture of the bourgeois, text-driven, capitalist, late capitalist culture was based on notions of categories that had no place for rhythm and sexuality. Along came rock and roll, thank God.
But it at least allows a process to go on that doesn't squash and eliminate or marginalize or dismiss people who may not be as powerful, people who may not be as rich, people who may not be as well placed in their thinking as you are. And I would prefer to champion that quality of involvement because it comes from Esalen in part too.
But that's, to me, that's a continuation of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was going on the streets, demonstrating, struggling for the rights of the black people, and then the feminists, and the gay people, all of that. Then in the Esalen group process of telling the truth in the group process is a form of that, of like person being able to be supported by you, David, setting the atmosphere where their voice starts to appear as an authentic voice, making claims on the world that they didn't know they could make.
Right, I think, you know, that the work we do at Esalen has to do with the fundamental notes you strike, the way you feel your energy, and the conviction that comes from being authentic comes from energy felt entirely. You dropped your ball, so to speak. What does that mean? You can stand your ground, speak your piece, be heard, to get taken seriously.
Yeah, but you need to provide the safety for them to do that.
Well, you need to provide encouragement. I think that can't be done necessarily in safety. It certainly can be done in a somewhat protected circumstance where you reduce the nerve rack, but you can't make everything entirely safe.
No, I don't mean that. I mean that what we have developed at Esalen is in trying to formulate it as a methodology, an ideology. It's that we have teachers who allow the student to unfold in a special way.
Yeah, that atmospheric mood of self-inquiry where the emergent logic is your gift is the atmosphere I think we create as teachers if we're good.
Yeah.
People learn what they need to know, and the courage to do it is supported by the ease by which we are able to bring ourselves towards anything that seems difficult, anger, sadness,
Anything that comes up emotionally.
Yeah, that's what I mean.